The head of BBC News comes on to explain the cuts announced this week. Welcome to Newswatch with me, Samira Ahmed. Coming up, why has BBC News chosen to axe its only dedicated long-form interview programme? And in the savings it makes, does it risk losing? What makes it most distinctive? Proposals to make cuts at the BBC as a result of reduced income and howls of outrage at those proposals are nothing new. In 2010, the licence fee was frozen at the same level for 7 years, heralding £670 million worth of economies made by the then Director General Mark Thompson. 5 years later, his successor Tony Hall announced the loss of 1,000 posts, and the current incumbent, Tim Davie, promised savings of £200 million 2 years ago. The result? A long series of axed programmes, job losses and squeezed budgets from which the news division has not been immune, prompting a viewer called Tom to comment, it's BBC cuts time of year again. Comes around quicker every time. Prominent among the casualties on this occasion was Hard Talk, the half-hour interview programme broadcast on the News Channel and on the World Service. Since Tim Sebastian first presented it in 1997, its guests have been high profile, to say the least.
Donald Trump, a very warm welcome to the programme. You say you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. That sounds like a very destructive business philosophy, is it?
Well, I'm not sure that I've actually used those words, but generally you have to shake things up.
What do you say to those who say it's still very much an authoritarian system here, despite the way you always talk about democracy and pluralism?
I don't know what you call authoritarianism.
Surely you must want the perpetrators of that chemical weapons attack in Douma, for which there is overwhelming evidence, to be punished.
No, wait. You are jumping the facts again.
Well, I don't think I am.
There is no proof that on the 7th of April, chemical weapons were used in Douma.
But there is proof.
And you'll see, 15 months from now, Joe Biden re-elected as President of the United States with great pride.
As you say, we'll see. Nancy Pelosi, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk. Thank you.
My pleasure.
The presenter for the past 19 years, Stephen Sackur, expressed his disappointment at the decision on social media and went on to discuss reaction to his post on the media show.
The messages all have one theme in common. They come from around the world, often from people who live in countries where their journalists are not able to ask the questions that those people would like to see asked of their politicians. We get to ask those questions. My greatest sadness and concern is for what this decision says about the BBC's commitment to the kind of journalism that I've believed in all of my professional life. I think the BBC is making a grave mistake by closing Hard Talk.
Susanna Kenyon was one of a number of viewers who echoed those sentiments, asking, don't you understand that people all over the world rely on this programme as they don't have such discussion in their own countries? They are hungry for it. That's not the only long-running show to disappear. Click will also end, to be replaced, minus its presenters, as a digital format called Tech Now, rather than a traditional TV show. The reaction of Keith from Suffolk? In a world that is moving faster than ever on the cusp of AI and other technologies, I am baffled as to why the BBC have decided to axe Click. In Radio 2, there are losses. The Asian network's bespoke news service will go, as will Radio 4's early morning news briefing. And domestic radio stations will get their news bulletins overnight from the World Service, rather than their own domestic summaries. All those proposals had their detractors, with Arib Ullah writing, the BBC purport to talk about promoting diversity in its reporting and then decides to cut the BBC Asian network's whole news team, a big loss for the community. Louise Tupman said she was very disappointed to hear of the proposed cut to news briefing. It's an excellent resource and an integral part of early morning news. Please think again and keep this gem. John McM thought, the World Service is superb, but most overnight UK radio listeners will be surprised by a global news agenda. And Robert Emery summed it up like this. It seems the BBC cuts often fall on the parts of its output that are most distinctive or valuable, those not well delivered by commercial rivals. Well, let's discuss all this with the Chief Executive of BBC News, Deborah Turness. Deborah, thank you for coming on Newswatch. Let's start with Hard Talk. It's the only dedicated long-form interview programme on BBC News. It has just one presenter. It runs on TV, online and radio. It was once described in the Radio Times as the most popular interview programme in the whole world. How much money will you actually save by cutting it?
It's done good work for decades for BBC News. But when you make £24 million of reductions and cuts to an organisation, you have to do some things that do hurt. We've looked at our audiences. Hard Talk is funded by and runs on our news channel. And we can see that audiences are coming overwhelmingly to our news channel for a live experience. I think what's also very important to say is Hard Talk does a great job, but we do have an awful lot of very high quality interview, accountability, rigorous journalism across the whole of BBC News. Just last night, because I think fresh examples are the most powerful, PM, as the news about Yahya Sinwar's death was breaking, did an incredible interview with General David Petraeus. In that same programme actually had to drop a pre-recorded interview with former Secretary of State John Kerry that they had done, which also is an amazing get and a very powerful piece of international journalism. Jeremy Bowen sat down with the deputy leader of Hamas a couple of weeks ago. Last week, Michal Hussein hosted the Today debate with stakeholders from the Oslo Peace Accords asking how does this conflict end? I mean, I could go on, but there are so many examples of brilliant, important journalism going on at BBC News.
The Asian Network's news service, that looks like another example of unique BBC public service broadcasting. It can't cost much money, and it's cuts like these which really damage the BBC's reputation and justification for the licence fee, don't they?
Look, this is where we work with our colleagues at Asian Network who are making broader decisions about the offer to their audiences. Their audiences are young, British Asians, and they are telling them and they are showing them the kind of content that they most value from the BBC. What we're doing there is we're going to be putting Newsbeat bulletins into the bespoke Asian Network bulletins, and Asian Network is investing in a 2-hour weekly current affairs format that will address in greater depth the issues that matter to that audience.
Why all these programme cuts? You know, news briefing on Radio 4 as well, instead of some of the big savings that you could make elsewhere, for example, on some of the big salaries that you pay to a minority of presenters and to managers.
We have to look at where we're driving greatest audience value, and that's why you're seeing a programme like Hard Talk impacted, because it's one programme that reaches a bespoke audience with a bespoke team of people who make it, and it isn't impacting far and wide, and it's a significant saving so that we can actually make better use of our journalism that's elsewhere in the organisation. So that's why we make those kinds of decisions.
Viewers of the news channel have already complained to us about the output being too international focused, especially overnight when it comes from Washington and Singapore. And now radio listeners are going to get their news from the World Service. So this isn't serving domestic audiences well, is it?
Our audiences on Radio 4 already listen to World Service bulletins overnight, and that change was implemented a while ago, and that's been going pretty well. And in terms of our news channel, I think since we brought together our domestic and international channels a couple of years ago to drive efficiency, we've really been listening to the audience. We've been looking at our numbers, you know, looking at the ratings and the movement of the audiences, and we've really worked hard to make sure that what we call our UK breakout team are able to break into our global feed with UK news to ensure that there is a good supply whenever news is breaking and shifting for the UK audience. And I think you can see in our ratings as we track them that we've really sort of stabilised and grown. Yes, early on there were some issues there, but we've really listened, and I think we've really adapted, and I think we're in a really positive place. We're still the #1 news channel in the UK market by a fair margin.
Deborah, you talk about listening to your audience, but the drive to more digital content and digital first under your leadership has faced a lot of audience opposition. People are very attached to specific radio and TV programmes, and when those programmes get cut, they get very upset. That's unlike how they feel about online products. Might you reverse any of these proposals?
We are looking at where the audience are going. having to make some difficult decisions, but also really innovating in ways that I am super proud of, whether it's launching BBC Verify, which is our forensic verification brand of journalism, which is really helping build trust with audiences by being much more transparent about our journalism, whether we launching BBC In Depth, which is a dedicated high quality added value digital product, which delivers that BBC classic, analytical, expert-led journalism, but to a digital audience, because they didn't have that before. They knew where to get that kind of journalism on our radio and TV platforms. Well, now they've got a place to find that.
You're cutting a lot of journalist jobs. Are any management jobs going in this round of savings?
Yes, they are. I think if you go back to the last round of change, it was called Modernising BBC News before I arrived at BBC. But there, I think a high number and a high percentage of management and senior roles were really impacted. This time, as we take out 24 million, we made over 40% of those cuts. We're going to be making over 40% of those cuts from non-staff changes, and we were very reassured that we were able to get to that number. But where we are impacting staff, over 10% will impact management roles and senior specialist roles.
Deborah Turness, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Thank you for all your comments this week. If you want to share your opinions about what you see or hear on BBC News, on TV, radio, online and social media, email newswatch@bbc.co.uk, or you can find us on X @newswatchbbc. You can call us or send us a WhatsApp on 0370 010 6676, and do have a look at our website, bbc.co.uk/newswatch. That's all from us for now. Thank you for joining us. Do think about getting in touch and perhaps even coming on the programme. We'll be back to hear more of your thoughts about how the BBC covers the news next week. Goodbye.